This is the first episode of the Final Mistake Files. I am so excited to bring you episode 1, the floppy disk that caught BTK. Let's dive into this. So imagine the guy next door. Not the creepy stranger from a movie, not someone living off the grid, not someone everyone in town whispered about. I mean, a normal looking guy next door. A guy who's a father, a husband, a church leader, a former scout leader, a man who served in the Air Force, a man who worked regular jobs, a man who later worked for Park City as a compliance supervisor, handling animal control and code reinforcement. The guy who might show up because someone complained about a dog, a yard gnome, or a neighborhood rule. Annoying, maybe. Suspicious? To most people, probably not. That man was Dennis Rader. To the ordinary outside world, he was married. He had 2 children. He went to church. He passed out church bulletins. He welcomed new members. He even became president of his church congregation. He worked at ADT Security Services, a company tied to home security, which is one of those details so darkly ironic, it feels like the universe needed a better editor. Later, he became the local rule reinforcement guy in Park City. People knew Dennis, but behind that normal-looking life was the BTK killer. BTK stood for bind, torture, kill, a name that Rader gave himself while he was taunting the police and the media. Between 1974 and 1991, he murdered 10 victims in and around Wichita and Park City, Kansas. Those victims: Joseph Ortero, Julie Ortero, Joseph, also known as Joey Ortero Jr., Josephine, also known as Josie Ortero, Catherine Bright, Shirley Vane Welford, Nancy Fox, Maureen Hedge, Vicky Welgery, and Dolores Davis. Before this case became famous for a floppy disk, metadata, and one of the most ridiculous criminal self-owns in true crime history, it was about 10 people whose lives were stolen. So today, we're talking through the real stories behind the BTK case. The victims, the timeline, the survivors, the double life, and the final mistake that exposed Dennis Rader after more than 30 years. The BTK case began on January 15th, 1974, inside the Otero family home in Wichita, Kansas. Joseph Otero was 38 years old. He was a husband, a father, and an Air Force veteran. His wife, Julie, was 33, and together they had 5 beautiful children. That morning, 3 of the older Otero children had already left for school. Still inside the home were Joseph, Julie, 9-year-old Joey, and 11-year-old Josie. Rader had stalked Julie Otero before the murders. He had worked with her at the Coleman Company, and according to later accounts, he began secretly watching her in the late 1973. On the morning of the attack, he cut the phone line and entered the home. He restrained the family and murdered Joseph, Julie, Joey, and Joseph. Sadly, their older children came home from school later that day and found the aftermath. This is where the BTK case begins. But for the Otero family, this was not the beginning of a case. It was the day their family was destroyed. It was a normal morning. Kids probably came downstairs and ate breakfast, went off to school. Parents were home. The younger children were inside. Then one man's violence changed everything. For Wichita, the Otero murders were terrifying because of where and how they happened. A family had been attacked in their own home during the day. There was no public nickname yet, no clear suspect, no understanding that this would become one of the most infamous serial murder cases in American history. Just a few months later, on April 4th, 1974, Rader attacked again. This time, The victim was 21-year-old Catherine Bright. Catherine also worked at Coleman. She came home with her brother, Kevin Bright, and Rader was waiting inside with a gun. This is one of those moments where Rader's plan went sideways because he had expected Catherine to be alone. Instead, Kevin was there. Rader forced the siblings inside. He tied them up and gave them a story about being wanted by the police and needing money. But Kevin fought back. He managed to break free and charge at Rader. Rader shot Kevin, including a shot to the head, but Kevin survived. Catherine was sadly stabbed and killed. Kevin's Bright's survival matters. He became one of the few living witnesses from BTK's early attacks. He also showed something important. Rader was not untouchable. His plans could fail. Victims could fight back. The control he wanted was not always complete, no matter how much he tried to pretend otherwise. After Catherine Bright, there was a pause, but silence does not mean safety. In October of 1974, Rader inserted himself into the investigation. After someone else reportedly confessed to the Otero murders, the editor at the Wichita Eagle received a strange phone call directing him to a book at the Wichita Public Library. Inside, police found a letter with details of the Otero murders and the phrase that would become his name: find them, torture them, kill them. BTK. That letter showed something investigators would see again and again. Rader wanted attention. He wanted credit. He wanted to control the story. He wrote with strange grammar, odd phrasing, and a disturbing sense of performance. He was not just committing crimes. He was trying to build an identity around them, because apparently evil also wanted branding. And side notes, when him and Rader and his wife were watching TV one day on the news, and it was showing photos of the letters that he had written, his wife turned to him and said, "That's how you write." And nobody said anything else. And I wonder if his wife would have pushed a little bit more, what would have happened? So now we're on March 17th of 1977. Rader murders 24-year-old Shirley Vane Welford. Shirley was a mother. Public accounts say Rader followed one of her younger children home, which gave him access to the house. Her children were inside during the attack. The detail is one of the hardest parts of this case because it shows how deeply these crimes invaded family spaces. This was not just violence against one person. It traumatized children and families who had to live with what happened. Later that year, on December 8th, 1977, Rader killed 25-year-old Nancy Fox. Now, Nancy lived alone. After murdering her, Rader called police himself to report the body. He gave the address and then disappeared back into the city. That call was not remorse. It was control. He wanted police to find her on his terms. He wanted the attention. He wanted them to know. Nancy's case is important because Rader later proved that he was the killer because he had the knowledge. He had details and materials connected to the crime that helped investigators understand they were dealing with the real BTK and not a false confessor. This is one of those pieces that matter in the long-running cases. Police get tips, they get false claims, they get people trying to attach themselves to famous crimes, but when someone has details only the killer or investigators would know, that changes everything. Then, in 1979, there was a near miss. Rader targeted 63-year-old Anna Williams. He waited inside her home, but she came home later than expected. Because of that delay, she survived. At first, she had no idea how close she had come to being another victim. Later, Rader sent communications referencing her because even when he failed, he wanted the credit, a truly pathetic little trophy shelf of ego. But after that, BTK went quiet for years. For investigators, this was maddening. Was he still in Wichita? Had he moved? Was he dead? Was he in prison for something else? Or had he simply stopped? But we know Dennis Rader. But in 1985, BTK killed again. On April 27th, 1985, Rader murdered 53-year-old Maureen Hedge. Maureen was his neighbor. That fact alone is chilling because it shows how close his crimes came to his own everyday life. This was not a stranger across town. This was someone near him, someone connected to the same neighborhood where he was pretending to be ordinary. He easily could have stood in his driveway while grabbing the mail and waved at her as she was driving down the street. That's how close he was to her. Now, according to later testimony, Rader took Maureen Hedges' body to Christ Lutheran Church. That detail is especially disturbing because the church was part of his public identity. It was where he was seen as a leader. It was where he would later be connected through the floppy disk metadata. The same place that helped him look respectable would later help expose him. He had taken Maureen's body and put him in the back of his car. And years later, he gave that car to his daughter to drive around. That, to me, is just bonkers. And so where are we? We are on September 16th, 1986. Rader killed 28-year-old Vicki Wagler. Vicki was a wife and a mother. Her case left pain that lasted far beyond her death because sadly her husband, Bill, lived under suspicion for years. That's the one thing of the hidden wounds of unsolved murders. Families grieve the person they lost, but they can also be forced to live under rumors, suspicion, and unanswered questions while the real killer continues on. Years later, Rader's own ego would help connect him to Vicki's case. In 2004, after years of silence, he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle that included photos from Vicki's crime scene and a photocopy of her missing driver's license. That was not just a taunt, it was evidence. Rader's final known victim was 62-year-old Dolores Davis. She was killed in January of 1991 after being abducted from her home. According to reporting and sentencing testimony, Rader later left her body under a bridge and returned to take photographs. It's a horrifying detail, but it also shows the pattern investigators later described. Rader kept records, took trophies, and relived his crimes. After Dolores Davis, the known murderers stopped, but questions did not. For years, BTK became a cold case. Wichita was left with a terrifying mystery. 10 known victims, letters, calls, evidence, then silence. But silence in this case did not mean the killer was gone. It meant Dennis Rader was still living behind the mask. By the early 2000s, the BTK case was cold but not forgotten. Families still wanted answers. Investigators still had evidence. Wichita still remembered. Then, in 2004, around the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders, media attention returned to the case. For most people, that kind of anniversary brings grief, memory, and reflection, but not for Dennis. It seems to have felt like the spotlight turning back on, and boy, was he ready to step into it. After years of silence, BTK began communicating again. He sent letters and packages to media outlets and police. Some included items connected to crimes. Some included writings, puzzles, sketches, and strange references to himself. He seemed to believe he was still controlling the game, and investigators just sat back watching. One package left in the Home Depot parking lot helped police through surveillance footage. They saw a vehicle connected to the drop, which became another clue. Slowly, Rader's need for attention was creating a trail. Then came the mistake that made this case famous for digital forensics. And truthfully, the whole thing blows my mind. Rader decides to ask police if a floppy disk could be traced. Police responded through newspaper message and told him it would be safe. And Dennis believed them. Let's just seriously pause there. This man had avoided arrest for decades, and then asked law enforcement if law enforcement could catch him with a disk. Of course, they're going to say no. And for some reason, he trusted it. In February 2005, Rader sent a computer disk to police through a local television station. The disk was given to cyber investigator Randy Stone. Hidden in the disk was metadata from a deleted Microsoft Word document. Metadata is like basically information attached to a file. It can show things like the author, the organization, and where the file was created or edited. On the disk, investigators found the name Dennis, along with references to Christ Lutheran Church and Park City Library. An internet search for the Christ Lutheran Church led police to the church president, Dennis Rader. Did not solve everything by itself, but it cracked the case wide open. Police still needed confirmation. They already had DNA evidence preserved from the BTK investigation. Investigators learned that Rader's daughter had a pap smear on file. They obtained a warrant for her medical records and compared her DNA sample to BTK evidence. The results showed that there was a familiar match, meaning the killer was closely related to her. That helped confirm that Dennis Rader was BTK. On February 25th, 2005, Dennis was arrested in Park City, Kansas. The man who had hidden behind an ordinary life for decades was finally exposed. And when he was arrested, he asked the arresting officer, "Can you just let my wife know I won't be home for lunch?" In June of 2005, Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. In court, he gave chilling details about how he selected, stalked, and killed his victims. His own words showed how calculated and detached he was. On August 18th, 2005, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. Because Kansas did not have the death penalty at the time of the murders were committed, the judge gave him the longest sentence possible, a minimum of 175 years without the chance of parole. The BT case is remembered for the floppy disk, and it should be. It's one of the most unbelievable mistakes in true crime. That is why this case belongs in the Final Mistake Files. Sometimes it's a hidden file, an old sample, and a killer who could not stop trying to be the center of the story. If this episode stayed with you, follow the Final Mistake Files for more cases where one overlooked clue, one bad decision, or one arrogant mistake can finally bring the truth to light.